I recently watched a video by True Dilton on protectionism, and I've made arguments in the past on free trade. Perhaps I never went into much detail, so for the purpose of this argument, I'm going to explain to you the reasons for why I support free trade over that of protectionism. I can understand people's argument on the free movement of people tying in with that of free trade, but this is perhaps the only thing that I support with regards to protectionism. Lou Rockwell made a reasonable argument on this, and that's to do with the fact that you have private ownership of property. You can't just walk onto anyone's private property and say or do whatever the hell you like, and therefore, as a result of that, you would require public ownership of land, of property, in order for there to be free movement of people anyway. So this is perhaps my argument for why I support control over immigration. Now, whether you argue in favour of decentralised immigration control or in favour of immigration control through that of the state, that's a whole other argument, but that's the only thing I support protectionism on. One of the main arguments in favour of free trade is that consumers have many more options available to them and are able to buy cheaper foreign imports. Now, I don't understand how this would be a detriment to the consumer. If anything, it's a benefit. They're able to buy cheaper foreign goods. But the fact is, with regards to protectionism, it limits the consumer's options and it forces them to spend in the domestic economy at a more expensive cost. And that is of no benefit to the consumer whatsoever. They may make the argument that the protectionism is all in the name of protectionism over jobs, and therefore it's benefiting people as a whole. But as I will get on to argue, this is the complete opposite of the truth, and you will see free trade in Great Britain had absolutely nothing at all to do with the decline of the manufacturing industry. It hurts the very other countries that you would trade with, destroys trade relations, and it's what led to war in many regards. It created resentment because what you're doing is you're setting down a barrier and you're restricting that country from growing, from exporting their goods to your country for them to benefit from. And when you look at history, whether you talk about the American Revolutionary War or the American Civil War, you saw that it was protectionist tariffs that led to those wars. Not because of slavery. In 1764 you saw the Sugar Act. That was overthrown by the capitalist class. Then in 1765 you saw the Stamp Act. Again, that was something overthrown by the capitalist class. And then a year later they tried something similar to the Stamp Act, just renamed something to the Townshend Act. Again, that was overthrown by the capitalist class. And eventually you saw the famous tea tariff of 1773, which essentially sparked the American Revolutionary War. In other words, the capitalist merchant class had formed the Boston Tea Party, and they said enough is enough, and they went to war with Great Britain, fought the American Revolutionary War for the independence, which was a capitalist revolution against the British mercantilism, and that's what led to the war. That resentment, it was because of the protectionist tariffs. And this was no different to the claim that the American Civil War was fought because of that of slavery. Okay, we can understand that the southern economy was more agrarian and they somewhat have themselves perhaps to blame for that, over that of the more industrialised based economy to the north in the United States. But it doesn't hide the very fact that the federal government, the main, state, has actually imposed a moral tariff that was a 50% tax rate, a moral tariff that harmed the agrarian type economy in the South. And that was one of the main reasons for why the American South fought the Civil War. It was all in the name of individual states' rights. They felt that the federal government was getting out of hand, and throughout recorded history it led to many of the different wars that we've seen. As I've gave the argument before on people having good intentions and there being dire consequences, this is no different to that on the protectionist tariffs. It may give benefit to that of some industry. It benefits one part of the market, but hurts another part of the market through that protectionism. And we pretty much saw that after the antitrust laws. And it's usually the consumers that are hurt the most. And like I say, it drives up the costs, and driving up the cost does not benefit the consumer whatsoever. So I don't understand why the cheaper foreign goods is a detriment to that of the consumer. As I touched upon on that of the foreign trade through the cheaper foreign imports, it greatly improves the material standards of living. When you look at the United States of America, over the course of a century, the material standards of living was continuously improving. You only have to look at the working hours in the early 20th century. People were working, longer hours, and they were obtaining fewer in quantity for what they had in wages. Whereas today, yes, the wages have actually been improving, and the material standards of living have dramatically improved. So people are able to obtain far more today than what they ever were, 30 to 40, even 50 odd years ago. If we were to turn our attention even to that of something small like the mobile telephone, the iPhones for example, it's remarkable how many people take these things for granted. Before that of the 1990s, you used to have, people without mobile telephones. Also, everything was all separate, such as radios, GPS. They used to go around with that of maps. That was their way, just through paper. They used to have microphones, everything separate. You didn't have the digital cameras, so even in those days, it used to be something remarkable that a digital camera had 1.2 megapixels. These mobile phones that they brought out with this amazing smart, this touchscreen technology, was able to do so much in one device. It even had the internet in it. People were able to contact people from the other end of the world, even able to take a picture or record video from a mobile telephone, and even to listen to music. And people take that for granted. That's just a small example of something that greatly, dramatically improved people's material standards of living. You could also look at that of Great Britain between 1843 to 1913, where the material standards of living had dramatically improved, as well as the workers' wages, for evidence that free trade had worked successfully. As well, of course, just turn your attention to Hong Kong, where there was vast opportunity and many jobs available in the free market. And that was a country that was not able to trade through that of the border of communist China. It was only able to trade through that of its tiny small fishing port. And with practically no natural resources, an average household income of less than 5,000, Hong Kong had thrived and prospered to become one of the richest, if not the richest city in the world by 1997. When you move on to their argument on that of protectionism, to say that, well, it's to protect jobs from what is being lost, they blame free trade for the cause of the closure of such industries, etc., and saying that the manufacturing jobs have all disappeared because they're all going offshore and it's all to blame on free trade. Fact is, Great Britain, free trade opened up in 1843 and it came to an end in 1913, so free trade was well out the door by 1913. Yet, the British manufacturing industry was long in decline since the 1920s. That is to say that the reason for why the British manufacturing industry was long in decline was simply because we were moving on a long transitional period towards a consumer-driven based economy. Part of the reason was because of government's intervention. We could no longer afford to be that manufacturing based economy, but it's just part and parcel of a market. When the market changes and consumer demand changes, then things are inevitably going to go out of the door. So whoever favours protectionism doesn't really understand that of consumer demand. They don't understand the market changing. A fine example of that would be the British coal industry. The British coal industry was long in decline since the 1920s. There was cheaper alternative sources of power coming around, such as the North Sea oil and gas, it was replacing coal gas, so coal was going out the door. We also seen domestic heating moving away from coal, and therefore that took an even heavier impact on the coal industry. Heavy industries that depended upon coal were all going into decline. And last but not least, most importantly, there was the cheaper foreign coal imports. And so there was no way that the British coal industry could compete with that of the cheaper foreign imports. Forcing protectionism on the British people to force them to pay at a higher cost of living for British coal is really just ignoring the market. Yes, many jobs were lost because of the British coal industry going into decline and the eventual closure of the pits, but what is completely ignored is the very fact that yes, the market was moving away from it, and those jobs were simply reallocated into another part of the market, which just so happened to be the service-based economy. So whilst those industries declined and all those jobs were lost, many more were actually created than what was lost. It just simply moved into an expansion of the consumer-driven based economy, and that's essentially what happened. And that's no different to that of the argument of what you see in the United States of America with the manufacturing based economy. Another way to look at this is that when people talk about the decline of the manufacturing industry, they forget that in a time period going back over a century ago, there was the large-scale decline of the agricultural industry, and that had absolutely nothing at all to do with free trade. The decline of the agrarian economy was simply a change in the marketplace, because you have to remember that during the Industrial Revolution, more and more careers opened up as a result of innovation. A small example would be photography. It wasn't an option before. As soon as the invention of the camera came around and people's working hours reduced, people were opened up to that of new opportunities, new career opportunities, and therefore the market was changing over time. There was more things available, and therefore because more things became available in the economy and there was new careers available, then of course the market changed. And so what you saw was a change from this, what used to be a strongly dominant agrarian type economy, became something more diverse. So of course, with what used to be a very dominant agrarian style economy, agrarian jobs were going to be lost, because that was all part of the change of how things came around. You can't just look at, trade and its impacts from the short term. You have to look at the long term effects. That's why when you look at the agrarian style economy, over 100 years ago, 200 years ago, you can see the vast change that we've gone through, where all of those jobs were lost, but they were simply reallocating into a newer part of the market. Well, that change from the agrarian style economy to that of manufacturing in the factories, etc., was no different to the transition of what we saw from the manufacturing towards the consumer-driven based economy over a lengthy period of the 20th century. In Great Britain and the United States, it was cheaper for us to get other countries to produce it for us. And it just so happened to be that China was the very country that we benefited from in trade, because we could get the United States to provide for us. They were able to produce for us, and we were able to benefit from that, because we could not afford to produce it ourselves. It was more beneficial for us in trade for China to produce and for us to simply import from China. I would like to hear your own personal opinions. If you've got anything you would like to add that I personally have not, please comment in the comment section below. If you've got any questions that you would like to ask me, comment in the comment section. Again, be sure to like the video, share the video, and of course, thank you for watching, and I shall talk to you later. Cheers.